Hello, everybody. My name is Janae, and I'm so excited to be able to say welcome back if you're not new. And welcome, of course, if you are. I am so happy to have you here. This video is going to be just where you all get to learn a little bit more about me, a little bit more about my kind of educational journey in terms of like my doctorate and what I'm studying, but also how I got here. So I'm definitely going to start at, being a shy fourth grader hiding in the hallway outside of my classroom, all the way up until now being a grown woman and studying leadership and psychological safety and collective action. So I'm excited to bring you all with me and let's go. Let's talk about it. Okay, so let's start first through third grade. So I've always been a like very curious kid, or I'm not a kid, but like I was. And so I had a lot of questions. I like to know things, I like to learn things. That was just a part of who I was. I'm still that person. But just, back then I was like younger, more compact. And but I always loved to learn. And so when I was in first through third grade, like that was just a thing. Me and my friends, like I was like somebody who was just really smart. And it wasn't like my other friends weren't smart, and they were, and we celebrated that too. But it was just this thing I remember in like first or second grade, somebody making up a rumor about me that when I was born, God opened up my brain and just shined a light in it and just shined in all the knowledge of the world. I know that's ridiculous, but it was something. It was like funny and cute. And again, it was never anything like egotistical. It wasn't like I'm smarter than you peasants. It was always just like I think my friends always understood like whatever I know, I'm going to use it to help. I'm going to use it to contribute. If you need something, we're going to figure it out because I've like gathered all this information in the past and now is my time to shine. Like when it's a problem, it's my time to shine because all the useless information that I've been gathering over all this time is finally, being able to be put to use. And so again, this is in like first through third grader terms. We weren't saying it like that, but like, it was just a fun thing to be celebrated. And then, so at one point in third grade, you go home for winter break, and I go home, and that's fine. And some point over winter break, my parents let me know that they had talked to my principal, and I was going to be moved up when I came back from winter break to fourth grade. So I was essentially skipping a grade. And it was exciting, but I was terrified. Like, one thing to know about my school back then, it was a private school, not overly expensive. Like, my parents definitely sacrificed to send us, my sister and I went there. Um, it was definitely a sacrifice. I don't mean to downplay that at all, but it wasn't one of those kind of like hoity toity private schools because we're going to get there later. But it was basically, for the small class sizes, for the tight knit community, things like that. So it didn't cost as much as other private schools, but it did obviously have a cost. It was a private school. Um, and this school actually went from pre-K to eighth grade. So the way it worked out was like pre-K and kindergarten, they kind of did their own thing. First through third grade did all of their stuff together: lunch, recess, field trips, all of that, assemblies, all of that. First through third grade did all that together. And fourth through eighth grade did all their stuff together: lunch, recess, field trips, assemblies. Obviously, fourth through eighth grade did that stuff together. So not only was I being skipped a grade and like leaving all of my friends in third grade, but it wasn't just as simple as going to another grade, to another classroom. Like fourth through eighth graders were considered the big kids. You know what I'm saying? Like that was like how the school was set up. And so I was going from, spending all my time with my friends to honestly pretty much no time aside from like before and after school when there aren't like structured things going on. And not only being separated from my friends, but like being thrust into this group of kids that are older than me. Like I'm the youngest person in fourth grade now, and this is fourth to eighth graders. And I am not, like, I just didn't have my time to acclimate to the group with my friends. And so that was an adjustment. That was like what was going through my mind. And so on the first day back from winter break, I am supposed to be going to fourth grade, and I am standing outside in the hallway, and I'm looking through like each classroom had this like metal door with a window, and I'm standing like there were some stairs leading up to the door. And I'm standing outside and I'm looking through and I can hear the teacher start class, and I can hear her kind of talking about how there's going to be a new addition, and I guess she's like wondering where I am, but I'm like literally like just standing out there like I can't bring myself. I am a shy introverted kid. Shy and introversion are not the same thing. I'm just saying. Quick aside. But I was this shy kid and I was terrified. And like right when I was about to like go hide somewhere else, she saw me. And so she brings me into the classroom and things go from there. And so there began my adventure into fourth grade, and just moving through the rest of school with, these kids, these students who, eventually became my friends, but I was infringing. And not only, and this part is going to sound egotistical, but I'm going to say it for a reason. I'll come back and clean it up. I promise it's not though. But it like quickly became that I also was like becoming a top student in fourth grade too. And throughout, like by the time we went to eighth grade, like that school ended in eighth grade. That's when you graduated. I graduated as a valedictorian of that class. And I only say that to say, it made school a little bit rocky. Like obviously, I was doing well in school. Sometimes people didn't love that I had come into this classroom and kind of been, not even put into the spot, kind of earned my way into this spot. And so things got rocky personally, you know what I'm saying? But that is a whole other story, and I actually will tell that story at some time. Maybe only to my Substack, so follow me there if you're interested, because I do kind of have a piece about that. Anyway, this is about what I'm studying and how I got there. So, all of that personal stuff aside, I go through class, and like I said, I graduate. I'm the valedictorian now of my eighth grade class, and these were small classes. Like, I'm not like it was like I think 13 of us in my eighth grade class. So I'm not saying it was some mass amount of people and I beat everybody out. But yeah, so that's kind of where I was. And the thing about, joining that class and kind of going through that whole experience, and I think I would have realized this regardless of whether I had skipped a grade or not. But education is where I had found my voice, where I found my voice. You know, regardless of how shy I was outside of the classroom, like I didn't dumb myself down. I didn't shrink inside of the classroom. Like if I was learning something, I was all in. If the teacher had a question, like, okay, think a little bit Hermione Granger. Like not so much of a know-it-all, maybe a little bit because I am a Virgo. Like it is what it is. I'm sorry, y'all. But not like overly so, but like a little bit, Um, and so I didn't shrink down in the education space, like in the classroom when we were learning. And so that was something that has stuck with me for a long time. So, and that's kind of being added to like my mental lens about education and what it means and what it can do for people. And so we get to the point where it's time for me to, apply for high schools. And my principal and one of my English teachers sat my parents down and they started talking to them about all of these schools. Great schools. I grew up in DC, and so they're talking about Stilwell Friends and National Cathedral and Edmund Burke and just a bunch of schools. If you're in the DC area from here or around here, the schools in that caliber, that's where my principal and teacher were trying to get us to apply. And so my parents and I started going on trips to view these schools. And they were I mean, intimidating, of course. Like, I'm this shy kid and I don't know anybody, and that's just my only experience with meeting new people was like good, but also rocky, Anyway, so that's kind of why I bring up that other part. And so I'm kind of in my mind, in my young mind, navigating like, how am I going to like fit in these schools, like all of this stuff. There's a lot going on. Um, and also, some of these schools are like in Bethesda, Maryland, which isn't like super far, but like when my parents work in downtown DC, or not really downtown, but like Howard University Hospital, getting me from our house to Bethesda, like get like in classes start at 7:30, like it was a lot. It was a lot going on, and not to mention these schools, to no one's surprise, had tuition rates that rivaled the college that I ended up going to. Like the tuition rates were astronomical. I mean so high. I know that there are people out there that can pay it. Obviously, these schools are still in existence, but yeah, so high. And so I'm sitting here and I'm watching my parents navigate this process, and I can see like they are completely willing to do what they can and do what they have to do to make sure that I continue to get a really good education. But I can see the toll that it's taking, right? And so I'm worried about that. In my brain, in my what, eighth grade, that's like I'm about 12. Yeah. So in my 12-year-old brain, I'm stressed out about it. Because I know my parents don't have that kind of money. I know we don't have the time and the everything, whatever. I knew that it was going to be such a strain. Um, and, in DC, we have our DCPS. And not all of some of the schools are really good, and some of them struggle a bit. And it just so happened, I think, that we didn't necessarily. My parents didn't want me to go to like what would have been my neighborhood school. They just wanted me to have some kind of continuous kind of education, and whatever. So all of that's going on. Then I hit eighth grade, or I don't hit eighth grade. I'm in eighth grade, obviously, but it's time for the science fair. In the like early spring, something like that. And I'm invited, like we do a science fair at my school, and I'm selected to go to like the citywide science fair. And so that's awesome. And so we go, we set up our projects, we're talking to these judges. Again, I'm like 12 talking to all these adults about, I don't know, probably some volcano that I made. Like it's a lot going on, but it's a good experience. And so I started walking around looking at all the cool projects. We go over to the high school side, looking at their projects. Very cool stuff. We get to the award part at the end. And I'm hearing like, when I say dominate, I want to say almost dominate. I keep hearing this school. Never heard of this school before, because that's the thing. Like, I went to a private school for first through, or kindergarten even through eighth grade. So I wasn't familiar with the schools in DCPS, any of the high schools. But I keep hearing this name, Banneker, Banneker, Banneker. These kids from Banneker High School are winning so many awards. Like they are racking up. And so I'm like, oh, what is Banneker? And I look, and I'm looking at some stuff, I'm talking to some people, and I realize that Banneker is a public school in DC. And even more, serendipitously, it is pretty much on the campus of Howard Hospital, or sorry, Howard University. And my parents at the time worked at Howard University Hospital. And so I go home and I tell my parents, there's this school there, and it seems like it's a public school. All these kids were winning all these awards. Like, I know that we're trying to figure out how to get me into, all of these different, very expensive schools. Like, let's check this one out. Um, Checked it out. Basically, it turns out that Banneker was, I don't know, I guess maybe the term is a magnet school. Like, it was a public school, but you have to apply. You have to be in like the top 18% of your class. You have to write an essay. You have to take a test. Like, it was a lot of stuff going on there. But like, so the school was there and available. And literally right up the street from where my parents worked. And so I apply, go through the interview process, go through all of this stuff, and I get in, and it is wild, and I am so excited. Um, and so let's be clear, I wasn't necessarily excited about going to high school because everything in my mind about public high school, regardless of who was winning science fairs or not, was like off of, I don't know, sitcoms where they were like flushing kids' heads down the toilets. Like, stuff like that. Like when I grew up in the 90s, like, I mean, they still have those kind of sitcoms now, but like that's the type of stuff that was on TV. Like, that's like She's All That, those movies, like, that's the type of stuff that we were watching. So that's in my brain, that's what high school is. And so I was really excited to be able to go, though, more so to alleviate my parents' burden. Like, I was just happy that it wasn't going to be so tough. But that also was kind of my first look at how your education really can be determined simply by where you live, and how unfair it is to have such a strong obstacle. And I mean, talking about financial, but also in terms of time, opportunity, like having such an obstacle to going to some of these, you know, fancier, more prestigious schools that, you know, where you admittedly get a very good education, but there's just there's so many barriers, and that was kind of my first real look at what that was like. And I would definitely say, I mean, my parents started to go through some like financial trouble later, like when I was graduating high school. So I was extra happy that we didn't, you know, stress ourselves out earlier. But I only say that to say, like, yeah, they were definitely like paycheck to paycheck, but we weren't, like impoverished necessarily. And so if in my mind it was like, if it's like this for us, like what is it like for people who, you know, aren't even as fortunate as we are? Like, you know, I'm recognizing we don't have everything. We, you know, we're not rich, but like we're definitely, we have, I mean, I didn't have this language back then, but like we have a lot of privileges, you know, all of this stuff. And even for my family, this was like a struggle. And so that really got me to start thinking about things. So I go through high school. I take a lot of classes. I take some honors classes. I take some AP classes, and I'm chugging through. I really am not like, as I'm growing up, I don't love science. Like, I love to read. I'm a reader. I just love it. I love it so much. Weirdly though, I always found like my math and science scores were always just a little bit higher when I was testing than like my reading comprehension scores. Everything was pretty high, but math was always a little bit higher. And it's funny because like I love to read and I love, you know, all of that comes along with it, but my mind is very kind of like pattern seeking, um like logical seeking order. Like just like I see chaos, I'm like, nope, 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 there's something here that can bring it to order. Like, and so that's just kind of how my brain went. So, but I didn't really love science. Until I got to chemistry. And at first, chemistry really frustrated me. And I hated it. And then I just had a breakthrough. Quick aside, like I said, the logic piece. I love puzzles. I love like logic problems. I love doing stuff like that. And so once we got to the part of chemistry where we were like balancing equations and finding out how many moles in the or molecules in the mole, all of that stuff, like that's when I was like, okay, yeah. So this was for me. And so I really started to really like chemistry. And I took that. I was like, okay, this must be a sign that I'm meant to study chemistry. And so again, I'm going through high school, get to the end of school, and I applied to a lot of different colleges. That's a whole other story. But I end up accepting my place at the George Washington University. And I got a full ride scholarship there. And that's really why I chose it. I mean, I'm happy that I chose it now. Like, I look back and I can't really see anything else for me. I'm sure, obviously, if I had chosen something else, my life would look a little different. That's fine, whatever. So in hindsight, it was a choice I'm so happy I made. But it was really, again, I was just trying to not burden myself in terms of loans or my parents in terms of all these payments for school. It was a free ride. They were like, let me be clear. There was no, once I got awarded the scholarship, there was no discussion in my household about whether or not I was taking it. I was taking it, and that was that. College was going to be paid for. Period. That's what it was, and right, that was the decision. That was what was right for me and my family. So did that, and started thinking about what I wanted to study in school, and I kept thinking like after while I was graduating high school, going into college, my thought was I want to major in chemistry and either double major or minor in economics. I want to start my own chemical research firm so that I can then start a nonprofit where I am helping underrepresented or students from underrepresented communities get into STEM. That was my goal. And that was always my goal. No matter what, that's what I wanted. That whole piece. It was completely. There was no part of it to take out. And so then I start school at GW. I even one summer I did an internship at the Carnegie Institute of Washington, which is kind of like an astrophysics laboratory campus thing. It's actually pretty cool. Um, and so for a summer, I did research or I assisted with research. I did some things, and the scientist that I was charged to work with was investigating origin of life, doing origin of life studies. And that was really, really interesting. But I kept there was something nagging at me, and by the end of the internship I was just thinking like I don't want to do this. And it wasn't the topic, it was the science. I met so many super interesting people. I really loved that summer. I really, really did. But it made me realize I just didn't want to do science for the rest of my life. I just didn't. And so then I'm kind of like, well, what do I want to do? And originally, I didn't tell y'all this part because, I was burying the lead a little bit. Originally, when I was applying to schools, I wanted to major in sociology. I didn't even really know what that was for real or like what I could do with it. And my grandfather at the time, he was not for it. So I don't want to make it sound like he was like being worse about this than he was. He was just kind of like, what can you do with that? Like, what practical thing can you do with a sociology degree? And at the time, I didn't have an answer. Like, I didn't know. I didn't know. I just knew that I was interested in people and studying and observing people and their relationships to other people and how people act when they're together in different scenarios. And like that interested me so much. And, but he was really my grandfather, I mean, and again, more power to him. He grew up in a time where his education was his way to a better life for himself, and it was a very clear. Like he studied pharmacy, like he did. He was into the pharmacy. He was eventually the director of pharmacy at Howard Hospital. Like he was amazing, and his education like got him there, and so he wanted something like that for me. Not that it had to be following those direct footsteps, but he wanted me to have something concrete. Chemistry made more sense to him, and so I went forward with it. Fast forward to this point in time where I'm just like, science is just really not for me. I just don't want to do it. I don't want to do it for the rest of my life. That's when I go back. I'm like, okay, I had been taking sociology classes as electives this whole time, and so I had already decided to kind of minor in sociology, and so I'd already taken enough classes. So I decided to just go ahead and switch my major to sociology. But it never is as simple as it sounds because at the same time all of this is happening, life is going on. So, as I mentioned, toward the end of high school, my family hit some financial hardships. And by the time I was a sophomore at GW, my parents, my mom had lost her job, my dad had lost his job. My dad had lost his job, my mom had gotten laid off, and it was just very tough. And so my parents made the decision to move to Tennessee. My mom, her parents were living in Tennessee. That's where my grandfather's from. And my dad is from Georgia, so he would be a little bit closer to his family as well. So my parents, my sister, and my brother, baby brother at the time, moved down to Tennessee. And I'm not one to, I don't want to self diagnose. But if I look back on that time, I am positive that I was just kind of covered in a shroud of depression. And I didn't really go home that much. Like, I went home enough, but like, I didn't go home that much. It wasn't like, it was just the absence of them around really affected me in a way that I didn't expect. My grades dropped. And I'm not gonna lie, some of this also coincided with me having a boyfriend and skipping school a lot. And there was but there was a lot going on. And I would have been, I think, I would have taken things a little bit more seriously for that like semester that I was kind of off the rails. If I knew my family was around to kind of like have that eye. And the thing is, I've never been an irresponsible person or kid. Like that just wasn't me. But I was just not go to class. I would go be with my boyfriend, or I would just like skip class. I would be doing all the work, but I just couldn't make myself go. And again, looking back, I was definitely depressed. And yeah, and that definitely took a toll. And so at a certain point, I want to say during what was my junior year, for the spring semester, I did the first half of the semester, and then I ended up needing to take the rest of the semester off. I hadn't registered for my classes yet anyway because of some things going on. And because of my grades and everything else that was happening in my life, I had temporarily at least, maybe permanently at that time, lost my scholarship. And so I went home to where my parents and my siblings were living in Tennessee, where I had grown up and spent summers there and everything with my grandparents. So it wasn't unfamiliar. And I went home and it was a bit of a spiral. And again, it wasn't like doing drugs, it wasn't drinking or like being promiscuous or anything. And like, again, I know people do cope in those ways and that's no judgment. I'm just saying that I want to be clear about that's not what was happening. It was just like, I'm very much a Virgo who is like, just does not want to burden other people with her feelings. So this mental spiral is like very internal. Like on the outside, I'm going through the motions. I'm, trying to get back into school. I'm doing all the things, but like inside in my own brain, I'm like, you are a piece of shit. Like you are awful. You're terrible. Look at the example you're setting for your siblings. Like people sacrifice all of this for you to do this, right? And so there's so much negative self-talk going on in my brain at this time. But at the same time, I'm home and my parents, my siblings, my grandparents, they never let me feel like a failure. Never. It was just like being home and being in a space with people who were so affirming to me made all the difference. My siblings, I mean, my brother was very, very young, so he wouldn't necessarily have been looking at me in this way. But, my siblings weren't looking down on me. Like everybody was rooting for me. And that is when I realized this was before the whole kind of explosion of the idea of a growth mindset or things like that. But I was just kind of like, that's when I realized like I can't make my identity being smart. I have to make the knowledge that I have useful. Like that is what is important here. It doesn't matter that I'm smart. It doesn't matter that I know things. I'm not going to class. I'm not doing all of these things. And that is the problem here. And I got to get back on track. And so I did. I talked to everybody I could talk to. got my scholarship reinstated, went back to school, and I didn't do as well as I had done for like most of my life, but did so much better than that one fateful semester. And eventually graduated. So I took a semester off, and then I had to do an extra semester when I changed my major from chemistry to sociology. So college was a lot of up and down. But I had a really strong support system, even outside of just my family. I joined my sorority in college, and everybody was so helpful, and again, made me realize the importance of not identifying as just being a smart person, but really thinking about how to use the information I have to better myself, to get myself out of situations, and also to keep myself out of situations in the future. So after college, I kind of gravitated toward education adjacent work. I wasn't always in classrooms. I was never a teacher, so to speak. But it was always about education impact, helping people to learn and access their education. I did very briefly do a stint in B2B sales and door to door B2B sales, and just further enhance the understanding that that's not my ministry. Like, I'm not good at it. It's not really something that was in my temperament anyway, but I needed a job. And so I was trying to make anything shake. And I did that. But after that, after that, things became education adjacent. So I spent some time in Tennessee. I had moved back down there after I graduated. But then I came back to DC for a program called City Year. CDO is a service organization. It's education focused. Now it is, and it is an American organization. It's a nonprofit. It is a leadership development organization. It wears a lot of hats. Back then, they were just getting into their education focus. So for the first couple of years, I worked on some service learning programs for middle and high school students. And there was some tutoring or some after school things that we did as an aside to our main service, but that was my main service. When I joined staff, I became a manager on the education side of things, the whole school, whole child model. And so I was a manager of teams in two different schools, and we were there to support the teachers, support the students, enrich the learning environment, etc. But as I mentioned, City Year is not only an education focused organization, it's also a leadership development organization. And that is where I really kind of blossomed and really kind of understood my interest in leadership as a concept as well as in practice. And so I'm developing as a leader, I'm doing all of these things, and I started thinking about grad school. I had so many different areas I wanted to study. I really, at one point, wanted to study education policy. That was really important to me because, again, education is where I found my voice. I was also really interested in like organizational psychology, organizational development type of things, which is funny because that's kind of where I am now, in a way. And because again, I was really interested in the space of like watching people do what they do just at work and figuring out how to do it better. Why is it not working? What can be like, what can we tweak? Like all of this stuff. So but there were other thoughts too. I thought about general psychology. I thought about, for a brief stint, I thought about archaeology. I thought about linguistics. I've always been interested in linguistics as well. But City Year eventually announced a partnership with Northeastern University where City Year alumni, people who had done City Year could go to Northeastern and get a graduate degree at a discount. And so eventually, and again, I'll tell that story later, but eventually I did end up going and I got a master's degree in leadership from Northeastern University. Now, that was a really interesting time because I applied to that program in the fall of 2019. That's when I got accepted and started in January of 2020, not knowing that my entire, for the most part, graduate experience would be housed under mass dooming fog of COVID. Now, I will say, my degree, I did it online because I was also working full time when I got that degree. Um, and so would not have been in person anyway. And honestly, COVID probably kept me in the house and made me study more than I would have if we had been out and about. But it was just a stressful time. But that was when I got that degree. I got it in about a year and a quarter. I graduated in April of 2021. Um, and it was such a good experience. I really loved just being able to delve in and study a topic that I was super interested in. And I got such a great foundation of leadership. And it's funnily enough, again, I'll talk about some of this later, but the leadership remix, the business, the YouTube channel, all of it, it started as an idea in my when I was doing my capstone project at the end of my master's degree, and so I really have that program to thank for so much of what I'm doing right now, and for so much of the foundation that I had set. And so yeah, that's been awesome. So I honestly thought that I was done with school after my master's degree. I was kind of over it. Again, I really loved the experience of getting my degree. I loved my classes for the most part. But I was just kind of over school, and I was done. But of course, I'm not really done. I'm a lifelong learner, and while I don't need a bunch of letters behind my name to prove that, like I just started craving some more like in-depth knowledge in a way that I knew needed to be facilitated. Like I could kind of create my own curriculum and read through things, but I just felt like I really wanted to get a doctorate degree. And my alma mater, my undergraduate alma mater, um, I actually ended up working there at GW. And once I started working there, I was like, okay, now it's definitely a no-brainer. I'm going to apply for this program. And so I did. And I got in, and I have just never looked back. I've really, really enjoyed this program. It's cohort-based, it's hybrid. So we were doing a lot of things like online or asynchronously, but then we would get together once or twice semester to like come together as a cohort and like really do some in-depth like conversational learning and like just things where we were like learning together. And it was really great. I loved it. I still love it, but the cohort part of the experience is over, and I'm like sad about that, but I'm also happy because now we're all kind of narrowing down and like starting to think dissertation. And so one thing about me is that when I came into this doctoral program, I did not know exactly what I wanted to study. A lot of my cohort members did know, and it did not change. Some of them changed, but most of them have kind of stayed steadfast. I knew that I wanted to let the like classwork and the coursework, the things that we would do in each of our classes, I knew I wanted to let that guide me toward what I would eventually study. So the program at GW is the EDD in Human and Organizational Learning, and it have four pillars. There's adult learning, leadership, change, and culture. And we had an introductory semester, and then we had a semester dedicated to each of those pillars. And I just let everything kind of come together. I, for a long time, was really intensely studying leader transitions and new leader assimilation, so like how leaders join new teams. And so I use a lot of that research in the work that I do today to help organizations and individuals like figure out how they're going to assimilate onto new teams or how they can help their leaders do that better. So that was really helpful. For a long time, I thought I wanted to study, and I delved really deep into like vertical mindset development. I really wanted to do some things with that, and it's still very interesting again. And I do use that information a lot, but I kind of moved past that. And so there were a lot of things that I just kind of went through each semester, kind of deciding how do I want to incorporate this into what I study. And you know, using the work that I did, the papers that was writing, the new interest that I was forming, really allowed that to kind of guide me to what I eventually wanted to study. Eventually, what went out and what was a through line through a lot of my interests was the idea of collective action and like shared and participatory leadership. So I wanted to study leadership, but I wanted to study leadership in a way that didn't feel like leadership isn't domineering and not as authoritative, but as relational and communal and kind of bestowed upon somebody as opposed to like I can decide that I want to be a leader and that goes a long way, but the people that I'm leading have to accept my leadership and agree that I am a leader and that they want to follow in the way that I'm leading. And so I really started to think about that, like what inspires people to act for each other and not just for themselves. How can leaders inspire that? Like, again, I've always been the person who wants to use what I know to help other people. And I've seen leadership do so much good for individuals and for communities and for organizations. And I see a lot of people who I would say are leaders, but I don't think they would call themselves leaders. And I just really wanted to help people find their own leadership style so that they can kind of lean into what's good. Because I think good and great leadership are what changes everything. And if people are allowed to grow into their leadership and to really acknowledge it and not be afraid of it, I just think we'll be that much better as a society, honestly. And honestly, my goal has always been to help people who are doing good to do good even better. And to do their work in an even stronger way, to increase their scope, to increase their impact. And so, kind of like when you boil it down in plain language, essentially what my dissertation is in its current iteration is really studying change driven, mission driven organizations and how they either disrupt or reinforce these kind of individualistic, neoliberal forms of identity and leadership and action and norms, and how that kind of informs how people are able to show up, how they're able to work together, and even if they're willing to work together. I really want to study organizations that say that they are about shared leadership and communal change and communal action and help them to be about that. I think a lot of the times in the society that we live in when we are very isolated from one another and things are we are living in these under these very kind of individualistic self-sufficient or ideas of self-sufficiency and how do because and then you because again I've worked at in nonprofits, I've worked in the public sector, and so much of the work gets blurred because you have these ideals and it's hard in this society to live up to them because society isn't set up like you're trying to change things, but obviously it's hard to do from within the systems and structures that you're trying to change. And so my idea is to really look at those organizations who proclaim to want to work and exist in those manners and help them to do that in an even stronger way, to help them to be a model, help to build models on how to do this, help to understand how this can be helpful, if this can be helpful. And so it's been such a journey getting there. But I'm so interested and so excited about it. I really want to understand the different mechanisms that help people move from thinking only of themselves to thinking of others. And some people, that's just natural. In some cultures and communities, that's just natural. But in a society where you are not rewarded for doing that, and when you are very much rewarded for like individual gain, what spurs people to communal action when the communal action will be for the better, but will also be very difficult? So that's essentially what I'm studying. It seems very apropos for our times, and I'm just really excited to kind of delve in. I actually did take this semester off just because with losing my job last year, and again, that's kind of how I was paying for school. I was going for free. So I have to like figure that out. There's a lot of stuff I have to figure out, and I want to give this business and everything that I'm doing a fighting chance. And so once I can get all of that kind of set and settled and at least some kind of situated, then I will definitely pick back up in school. My hope is to get back in the summer. So I don't want to spend that too much time out of it. But yeah, that is what I'm studying. That was basically a walk through my like educational journey. So hopefully you enjoyed that. If any of that resonated with you, let me know. Have you ever been in any of those types of situations? Have you ever had any kind of aha moments that just kind of really changed the trajectory of your life and what you're doing? I would love to hear about it. Yeah, because this, like, I started talking, this video is much longer. I can already tell. I know I'm going to edit a bunch out, but it's much longer than I thought it was going to be. But I'm sitting here yapping about my life. So hopefully you enjoyed something in there too. With that, I will just say thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. I just really wanted to share a little bit more about myself so that you all understand where I'm coming from and what I'm aiming to do. And now that I've spent a good amount of time doing that, talking about myself, I'm gonna go. But I hope to see you all on the next one. I am so excited about what's up next, and I'll talk to you then. See you later. Bye.